One last question on the political organisation. Is there not a danger that with this sort of hierarchical tier of assemblies and quasi-governmental structure without direct elections, that the central body, or the body that is in some sense at the top of this pyramid, gets very remote from the people on the ground, and since it will have to have some powers if it's going to deal with international affairs, for example, deal with other countries, and may even have to have control over armed forces and things like that, that it would be less democratically responsive than the existing regime?
Well, first of all, there would be direct elections under any, except the direct elections would be at every one of these levels. That is, as far as the lowest level is concerned. Say
the next level would then elect the level above that.
Now, the question is, I think it's a very important property of any libertarian society will be to prevent an evolution in the direction that you've described, which is a possible evolution, and one that institutions should be designed to abort, to prevent. And I think that that's entirely possible. I mean, I'm totally unpersuaded that participation in governance is a full-time job. I don't think it is. It may be in an irrational society where there are all sorts of problems that arise because of the irrational nature of institutions. But in a properly functioning advanced industrial society organized along libertarian lines, I would think that executing decisions taken by representative bodies is a part-time job which should be rotated throughout the community, and furthermore should be undertaken by people who are at all times continue to be participants in their own direct activity. Now, it's possible that it is necessary to have that governance is itself a function on a par with, say, steel production. If that turns out to be true, and I think that's a question of empirical fact that has to be determined, can't be projected out of the mind, but if it turns out to be true, then it seems to me the natural suggestion is that governance should be organized industrially as simply another branch of industry. That is, the civil servants or others who are involved in this form of activity, taking it to be, by hypothesis now, a meaningful and useful form of activity, that they themselves should be organized as simply one of the branches of industry with their own workers' councils and their own self-governance and their own participation in broader assemblies. Now, and I might say that in the spontaneous development of workers' councils that has occasionally appeared here and there in the world, well, for example, in the Hungarian Revolution of 1956, that's pretty much what happened. There was, as I recall, a workers' council of state employees, I forget what they called themselves, civil servants or something like that, who were simply organized along industrial lines as another branch of industry. That's perfectly possible. And it should be, or it could be, a barrier against the creation of the kind of remote coercive bureaucracy that anarchists, of course, fear.
Professor Chomsky, I think that might be a convenient place to interrupt ourselves in a moment. I'd like to come back and press you a little further on how that would work out, for example, in relation to the control of the Pentagon and the defense organization in societies, if there would be any. We'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back. Well, in part one, I've been talking to Professor Noam Chomsky of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology about Libertarian Socialism, or anarchism, as a political theory and as a possible alternative to our existing liberal democracies, and towards the end he was describing the political constitution of an anarchist society. Professor Chomsky, I'd like to press you a little bit further about the way in which effective democratic control would be achieved consistently with discharging the necessary functions of such a society. If you suppose that there would continue to be a need for self-defense on quite a sophisticated level, I don't quite see from your description how you would achieve effective control by the system of part-time representative councils at various levels from the bottom up over an organization as powerful and as necessarily technically sophisticated as, for example, the Pentagon, which is a body with which you've had quite a long record of conflict over the Vietnam War and other matters in recent years. Can you describe how the Pentagon could, at one and the same time, be efficient as a defense organization and nonetheless properly responsive to democratic control within the United States if it was an anarchist society?
Well, first we should be a little clear about terminology. You refer to the Pentagon, as is usually done, as a defense organization. And in fact, I remember very well in 1947 when the National Defense Act was passed that established the current system of war-making The former War Department, the American Department concerned with war at that period, up to that time, was called, honestly, the War Department, and it had branches. And its name was changed in that act to the Defense Department. And any sophisticated person, and I was a student then and didn't think I was very sophisticated, but I knew, and everyone knew, that this meant that to whatever extent that the American military had been involved in defense in the past, and partially it had been, so this was now over. Since it was being called the Defense Department, that meant it was going to be a Department of Aggression, nothing else.
The principle of never believe anything till it's officially denied.
Right, sort of on the assumption that Orwell essentially had captured the nature of the modern state. And that's exactly the case. I mean, the Pentagon is in no sense a Defense Department. It has never defended the United States from anyone. It has only served to conduct aggression. And I think that the American people would be much better off without a Pentagon. They certainly don't need it for defense. I think its intervention in international affairs has never been, well, never is a strong word, but I think you would be hard put to find a case. Certainly it has not been its characteristic posed to support freedom or liberty or to defend people and so on. That's not the role of the massive military organization that is controlled by the Defense Department. Rather, its tasks are two, both quite antisocial. The first is to preserve an international system in which what are called American interests, which primarily means business interests, can flourish. And secondly, it has an internal economic task. I mean, the Pentagon has been the primary Keynesian mechanism whereby the government intervenes to maintain what is ludicrously called the health of the economy by inducing production. That means production of waste. Now, both of those functions serve certain interests, in fact, dominant interests, dominant class interests in American society, but don't think that they in any sense serve the public interest. And I would think that this system of production of waste and of destruction would essentially be dismantled in a libertarian society. Now, one shouldn't be too glib about this. If, let's say, if one can imagine, let's say, a social revolution in the United States, that's rather distant, I would assume, but if that took place, it's hard to imagine that there would be any credible enemy from the outside that could threaten that social revolution. We wouldn't be attacked by Mexico or Hawaii or something like that. Well, it's a part of the United States, Cuba, let's say. An American revolution would not require, I think, defense against aggression. On the other hand, if a libertarian social revolution were to take place, say, in Western Europe, then I think the problem of defense would be very critical.
I was going to say, I mean, it cannot surely be inherent in the anarchist idea that there should be no self-defense, because such anarchist experiments as there have been have, on the record, actually been destroyed from
it certainly is not, yeah. But I think that these questions cannot be given a general answer. They have to be answered specifically relative to specific historical and objective conditions.
It's just that I found a little difficulty in following, before the break, your description of the proper democratic control of this kind of an organization on the basis that the defense organization itself would become some kind of workers' cooperative.
And I wouldn't say that.
I find it a little hard to see the generals controlling themselves in a manner which you would approve of.
Well, that's why I do want to point out the complexity of the issue. It depends on the country and the society that we're talking about. In the United States, one kind of problem arises. If there were a libertarian social revolution in Europe, then I think the problems you raise would be very serious, because there would be a serious problem of defense. That is, I would assume that if libertarian socialism were achieved at some level in Western Europe, there would be a direct military threat, both from the Soviet Union and from the United States. And the problem would be how that should be countered. That's the problem that was faced by the Spanish Revolution. There was direct military intervention by, really three-pronged, by fascists, by communists, and by the liberal democracies in the background. And the question how one can defend oneself against attack at this level is a very serious one. However, I think we have to raise the question whether centralized standing armies with high technology deterrence are the most effective way to do that. And that's by no means obvious. For example, I don't think that a Western European centralized army would itself deter, say, a Russian American attack to prevent libertarian socialism, the kind of attack that I would quite frankly expect at some level, maybe not military, at least economic.
But nor on the other